This task is from our Systems of Equations and Inequalities unit, with the lesson focusing on graphing systems of inequalities. Students at this point have already graphed individual inequalities, so we're going to take that a step further and use this task as an introduction into graphing systems of inequalities. So we have some reminders for the students. We want them to remember solid versus dashed line, and we want them to remember how they know where to shade on the graph. So we provide with them with two inequalities, a graph, and we use wipe books in our classroom. So the front side is just a blank whiteboard style, and then the back has a graph. So the students are able to flip that over and use the big graph on the back of that. After they are done graphing, we want them to look at what do you notice about the shading on the graph? Is there any overlap? What do you think that represents? And the final part is we're going to give them 2 points, and we want them to have a conversation with their group about, are these solutions of the system? What do you think? Since they haven't been taught what that means yet, it's a good conversation for the students to start having so they can start creating justification for their thinking, and then it will come together in the consolidation piece. Depending on the group, we had students who immediately set into graphing points. And then we had others that started with the conversation first on, okay, what do we remember about the solid line, the dashed line, and the shading? So we do want students to either go ahead and put the points on there and then have the conversation, or have the conversation before they put the points on the graph, so that everyone in their group is in agreement about solid versus dashed and the shading. We give the students about 10 minutes to complete this task so that we have time for consolidation. This is what the completed graph should look like. So as we are walking around, we're just kind of looking for some of the main components and asking students questions about the dashed line, the solid line, and the shading. We're not really giving them instruction at this time, and we can use questions to help push their thinking if we notice a misconception or an error. After the 10 minutes, we move on to the consolidation piece. We have the students stay in their random groups and at their boards, because we do want them to be able to see the work and anything they wrote down when we move into this piece. So for the first part, we're really just making sure, did you have an opportunity to graph both of the inequalities? Did you have a solid or dashed line? In what direction did you shade? So if we find that there are any disagreements among the groups on which part was shaded, or if it was solid or dashed line, it's a good conversation to have, and they can refer back to their notes and we can correct those errors before we move on to the next piece. This time we want to ask the students what they notice about the shading on the graph. And they are going to mention that the bottom left portion of the graph is where the shading for each inequality has overlapped. At this time, we prompt the students with a question so they really start thinking about what that region of overlap represents. And we just want students to really share what they think it is. They have the knowledge of what the area that is shaded on the graph represents when they are doing one inequality, but we want to get them to the point of how can they connect that to when we have a system. The following questions will help us push them in the direction of realizing that the solutions to the system lie in that overlapped region. Now we're really going to get students thinking about the solutions to the system. So we say we're going to give you 1 minute to talk with your group to decide if you think the point -3 is a solution to the system. And we let them get talking. And then probably about 30 seconds in, we say, hey, we just want to clarify something. Is it a solution to this system? Not just a solution to one of the inequalities, but to the system. And that really gets kids thinking about that region of overlap. And then we tell them to pause and we ask them the exact same question, but for the point -1, -1. And we really want students to talk with their group. After we give them a minute to talk about each of those, we pull them back as a group to share what they think. The students have naturally gotten to the point of understanding what the area of overlap represents on the previous slide, but we still like to reiterate it and say, okay, remind me now, what is that area of overlap representing? Just to make sure that we have everyone on the same page and we really think they have gotten the objective of the task, we present them with two more inequalities and ask them to go ahead and graph them on Desmo's graphing calculator. This is what the graph should look like. In our directions, we did tell the students to make the inequalities a specific color just to make sure as we are having our discussion, we're all looking at the exact same graph. The final part of this is that we ask students to give us an example of a point that is a solution to the system and an example of a point that is not a solution. This is just another way for students to have the conversation again and make sure that they really have grasped the objective and the main point of this task.